Hey all folks, welcome to our Monday Mindshare. This is part 3 of a 3-part series, and super excited after a year of development and lifestyle testing. We're announcing an all-new product today at SFuels. I think it's probably our 15th product, but this particular product super exciting because of its wide application. In part 1, we had Dr. Dan Plews talking to us about recent research on fat oxidation and also caffeine and its use in sport. In part 2, we then went on to talk about multiple different lifestyles that certain nutrients are having on the endurance capability, whether that's in sport, endurance sport, whether that's in a professional career minded folks, or also in the amazing world of the gamer and the competitive gamer. 3 pathways we talked about that were affecting in a negative way the endurance performance of these 3 lifestyles, and we talked all about that in part 2. And you can check them out on YouTube. I'll put the links up here in the corner, and you can take a look at that. But just a quick recap to help you just recall a little bit of what we covered in part 2. 3 pervasive lifestyles we talked about: endurance sports, endurance work days of the career professional, and the gamer. Endurance sports, it's not just the race day having 8, 17 hours, sometimes even multi-day race days, but it's the magnitude of the training that these athletes are embarking on and embracing can be anything from 10 to 20 hours or more in a given week. And they want to rise to the challenge of that and the curiosity that really fuels them to work out what's possible for them. In the career professional, historically it was 8 hours a day. It was typical work, average work day. That is extended out to 8.5 days, but that's really just part of the story. It's now in reality more like an average of 12 hours per day, in the spirit of it's an expanded work and life balance as the virtual world and the real world converge into this new hybrid work environment that we're living in. Add to that, they're typically now traveling 7.5 times a year. This is all adding to the endurance challenge of the workday professional. And lastly, this exciting world of the gamer. Over 200 million gamers in the United States alone. The average longest span of consecutive gameplay for these esports athletes is 5 to 6 hours now, depending upon your age group. And it's incredible the focus and the accuracy and the lightning reaction times needed to have obviously just a fun social time, but also be competitive in the world of gaming. So across these lifestyles, we started researching and trying to understand what's involved to support in a nutrient way the imminent challenges of the race, those mammoth work days, and also the competitive, fascinating world of esports and gaming. It's not just about, if you will, the performance in the game or in the race or of that day at work, but it's also about nutrition that can support longevity, the long run, if you will, of the health of the gamer, of the professional career-minded, and also of the endurance athlete. And this is what we mean at SFuels about going longer. Support in the moment for high performance, and also the longevity of the lifestyles that we love, whether that's in sport or our career or recreation like competitive gaming. And to that end, we looked at a bunch of research in developing products to support this, and some of this where it was possible. We looked at a lot of meta-analyses and systematic reviews that looked at multiple studies at once in evaluating different nutrients and their value as support for these different endurance lifestyles and challenges. Now, briefly, again, what we talked about both in part 1 and part 2 was there was a number of classic foods and nutrients that, folks have been using for years, in fact, decades, to try to upgrade their lifestyles: coffee, energy drinks, teas, a lot of sugar. And all of these things have effects, clearly. But the clarity of what is helping and what's hindering, it's not always obvious. And how much is coming with some of these foods, whether it's too little or too much, is also unclear. And there's a massive variance of the nutrients inside of some of these food and drinks, whether it's a low amount of caffeine or a very high amount of caffeine or a high amount of sugar. It's not clear what actually is helping or hindering the support of that upgraded endurance capability. So the outcomes are then unpredictable, whether that is, blood sugars that are crashing during the game or during the sport or during the day at work, the fat oxidation that can give you a very sustained level of energy can be blunted. Certainly ketogenesis will be furthermore blunted. And these things result in the brain fog or the lack of clarity in our minds and an ability to actually, in the workday environment, have strong executive focus and decision-making, be alert, be able to collaborate. And these things are very real in today's work environment. The same applies in gaming, where reaction times come down, where we make errors. And in the sport, obviously, loss of power and fluctuating energy levels is the last thing we need to be competitive in endurance sport. So what have we been working on? Well, this is an all-new SFuels product. It's all about priming both the metabolic and the cognitive side of the body. So when we talk a little bit about priming, it's a little more than maybe the word just implies. It's not just about stimulating the body once and for that peak. It's more about having a nutrient stack that has a more balanced modulation between stimulation and inhibition. When we say priming, it's not just about throwing a lot of substrate at the mitochondria to produce energy. We want to increase the efficiency of that, not just of what comes into the mitochondria, but we want to make sure as the powerhouse of the cell is doing all of this oxidation and creating all of this energy, we want to also that we're clearing the metabolites out of the mitochondria after the oxidation has happened. And we also want to unshackle, if you will, the downsides of sugar on the effects, the positive effects of upgrading our metabolism and cognitive performance. And finally, when you work out how to best prime your mojo, you'll want to do it again. So you need a measured dose to do that. You need something that's reproducible. You know what the input is, and you start to getting more and more feel and understanding to what the output will be. And that's important, whether it's in endurance sport or the endurance of the career professional, or certainly the endurance in esports and gaming. So welcome to our latest product at SFuels. So welcome to our latest product at SFuels, SFuels Primed. It comes in two flavors. It comes in watermelon and pineapple, and it's beautifully packaged in sachets for convenience. We put 15 of these in a box, which I think you're going to love it when you see it. And you just mix it into cold water by itself, or you can mix it into our SFuels Train product or our SFuels Race Plus product, depending upon if you wanted to use it for a workout, where SFuels Train would be mixed with SFuels Primed, or the same can be used in the workday environment where you don't need the carbohydrate. The same can be used in the gaming environment where you don't need the carbohydrate. And then obviously in high intensity workouts or racing, you would mix SFuels Primed with the Race Plus. And I'm going to talk through some of the usage models, those 3 usage models for those lifestyles inside. But before we do, everyone wants to know, well, what's inside? So let's take a look. There are really 4 ingredient nutrients, or there's 3 ingredients and 1 group of nutrients. And I want to talk to the functions of these nutrients that we've studied and we've now chosen in this formulation. But the functions that are relative to the primed application. There's many, if you will, broad applications and functions of these nutrients, but we won't cover them all. We're just going to focus on those functions that are specific to the application that we're looking for in the SFuels Primed usage models. So the first, and there's 4 of those really, 4 pillars, if you will. There is all around upgrading fat oxidation and ketogenesis. So we want to formulate the product for efficient energy metabolism. Secondly, we want to have a stack or a complex of different nutrients to support, like we said, a more modulated cognitive upgrade. not just a spike and crash, but we want a far more modulated cognitive upgrade. And we want to mix with that the avoidance of sugar, so we're mitigating any of the downsides associated with cognitive and metabolic upgrades that we're actually looking for. And then finally, as we said, we want a measured dose, the fourth pillar, a measured dose, so you can understand and then reproduce your prime of your MOJO. So let's talk on the upper left about, firstly, fat oxidation, ketogenesis. Caffeine, in multiple studies, in fact, since the 1970s, has shown to increase fat oxidation. It also increases ketogenesis, the production of ketones, particularly from medium chain triglycerides. And that's why we talked about using this also with SFuels Train, which has the MCT in it, into a drink, and then you increase the ketogenic capability of that particular drink. And then we add to this taurine, and taurine has functions here as it relates to how it synergizes with caffeine, and it's shown in a number of studies to improve the time to exhaustion. We add to that acetyl L-carnitine. Now, this particular nutrient comes in multiple forms, and it's probably known more as just carnitine or L-carnitine. Acetyl L-carnitine is what is found in the body. It's absorbed well also in the small intestine. It crosses the blood-brain barrier, and it performs a number of functions, both in multiple tissues around the body, particularly in nervous tissue and neuronal tissue, and also in muscle tissue, etc. As it relates to fat oxidation, carnitine has a role in transporting the shuttling, if you will, of fatty acids into the mitochondria for oxidation. Now, I'll say that it does that in it supports that if there is a deficiency of carnitine. It supports that deficiency as a supplement. And there are some studies that have looked at, if you dose high and high and high and high, do you get better and better and better fat oxidation sports performance? And that is not the case. And that is not what we're promoting here. What we are ensuring that for these endurance lifestyles, that there is certainly the supplement provided to ensure that there is not a deficiency and that there is effective movement of the fatty acids into the mitochondria to support energy production and the oxidation of fatty acids. And there's a number of other functions that are really important of acetyl L-carnitine, not just for how it helps to bring those fatty acids into the mitochondria, but also how it helps to bring things out. I'll talk about that in a second. Upper right-hand side, caffeine. It's clearly well-known, well-studied, and well-experienced, if you will. Everyone on earth almost has been some type of biohacker, if you will, on understanding how caffeine helps them. They've used teas and coffees and chocolates to help them and understand how they can upgrade, whether it's the mood or their vigor, their assertiveness. But there's been a lot of studies done on this, and specifically around its cognitive function, how it improves things like vigilance, which means even in those very lengthy, tedious tasks, how it continues to keep you focused to execute with accuracy and repetitive consistency. Executive functions like decision-making and clarity of thought, and reducing reaction times. And what's really interesting, particularly to the athlete, is it can reduce that rate of perceived exertion, that as we ramp intensity, our perception of exertion can actually be reduced through caffeine. Now, the next two nutrients, which I talked about earlier as it related to fat oxidation, also have a key function in this cognitive side, the upgrade, if you will, of a cognitive functions, and that is taurine and acetyl L-carnitine. Both of these nutrients, which are amino acids, they have a neuromodulatory effect, which what that means is we're increasing some other neurotransmitters, particularly GABA, and that particular neurotransmitter is facilitating, if you will, the more balanced, the other side of stimulation in a more inhibitory effect, to have a more modulated effect on how both of these nutrients work with caffeine to give a more balanced effect, an upgrade, if you will, to our cognitive function. This is important because as we come into a race or into a workday or into the game, we don't want to be hyper excited. We want to have a calm embrace, a confidence and assertiveness that we can, if you will, rise up, step up to and embrace the challenge of the game, the sport, the workday, etc. And we can do that by having a modulation between some of these amino acids. Acetyl L-carnitine also has a very interesting aspect. As I said, it doesn't just shuttle fatty acids into the mitochondria, but it also has a really interesting protective effect by actually removing and helps to shuttle out of the mitochondria the waste or the metabolites that come from fatty acid oxidation. And that's important. If we are going to increase the fatty acid oxidation, we owe it to the body to also facilitate the removal, if you will, the exhaustion of getting that those metabolites of fatty acid oxidation out of the mitochondria. And then what we've said is, if we're going to facilitate this upgrading of the cognitive and the metabolic functions, we really have to make sure that sugar is not added to that nutrient profile, because as we do that, we know in many studies that heightened sugar or hyperglycemia, and you can see this, type 2 diabetics, type 1 diabetics, that their cognitive function on general, the research would say, is certainly lowered in those states of hyperglycemia. So we want to reduce that. That will also facilitate that fat oxidation continues because insulin has not been stimulated or overstimulated, etc. And that will help us to, as I say, maximize fat oxidation, help us to continue with the generation of ketones, etc., to also feed the brain. And finally, the nutrient model of all of this needs to be in a measured dose so that it's reproducible. The caffeine needs to be a material dosage that you can hit. The types of dosages required to turn on some of these capabilities, and we'll talk about some of that as I go into some of these usage models. But it needs to be reproducible. You need to know what the inputs are so that you can tweak it relative to everyone's metabolism is different, but have a predictability of what the inputs are so that you can manage it for reproducing it in the future. So let's talk about 3 different use cases, if you will, for these 3 different lifestyles. Firstly, sport, endurance sport. In the top right is typically what happens, that prior to race start, there is the consumption of some type of carbohydrate, and that immediately triggers insulin and can blunt that fat oxidation. What we also see in a lot of athletes is the overconsumption in a compressed amount of time of carbohydrates, whether that's in the form of gels or drinks, etc. And this triggers the #1 reason for not finishing many of these endurance sports, and that's gut distress. Conversely, what we see as another approach is to try to, if you will, plan out in a very timed way these gel, which usually has a carbohydrate and a caffeine in it together. The problem with this is that if you look at the amount of caffeine, it's low, that it takes quite some time before, if ever, to get to the dosage we really need for fat oxidation to be improved. And that's problematic if that's really what we're attempting to try to achieve, is to upregulate, to prime, if you will, the fat oxidation in a higher capability to support a higher intensity of performance. So with SFuels primed, the usage model would work like this. It takes about 60 minutes for some of these nutrients to get to their highest levels, if you will, in the body after consuming them. So we start 60 minutes prior to the race or the workout by taking one of these SFuels Prime sachets. Race start happens, or the workout starts, and we stop. We don't begin taking carbohydrate until 30 to 60 minutes into the workout or into the race. And the reason for that is we're trying to open the GLUT4 channels. These are the transporter channels in the muscle cells to facilitate glucose to come into the cell and fatty acids to come into the cell, into the mitochondria, without the need for insulin. And that's really important. If we can avoid that, we can really optimize, if you will, the sequential oxidation most efficiently of both fat and carbohydrate through the race. And then what we want to do from 30 minutes to up to 2 hours or 120 minutes into the race, we want to add SFuels primed up to 3 milligrams per kilogram. And the reason for that is that it's at that dose that then fat oxidation, based on all the different research articles, that it can upgrade that fat oxidation to a higher performance state. Now, after about 6 hours, caffeine, about 50% of it typically has cleared the blood. And after about 10 hours, it's typically fully cleared the blood. So in for example, Ironman racing or ultra racing, in that 6 to 10 hours, you can consider adding again further SFuels primed to bring the caffeine back up again to stimulate the fat oxidation and the mental intensity, the cognitive functions again. On the website, we'll show you exactly how to do this to make it really simple relative to your weight. How many of these sachets should I have? I'm going to take 60 minutes before, and then I'm going to take 1, 2, 3, maybe even 4 in that several hours into the first part of the race or the workout. Okay, let's take a look at another lifestyle, and this is of the career professional. So typically, whether it's your local coffee chain, coffee house, etc., you hit some type of high sugar, high caffeine product, and again, the fat oxidation gets switched off. It's blunted. The ketone production is blunted because the insulin comes up, and as the insulin comes up, the fat oxidation stops. With that sugar, furthermore, the sugars come up, and then there'll be the insulin, and then the insulin will drive the sugar down, and that sugar coming down, crashing. This is when you're going to be exposed on your mental edge and your poise. This is when you will have challenges in terms of clarity of thought. This is when brain fog begins to occur. This is when also our ability to collaborate can be challenging. And this cycle continues. It's just not uncommon to see that through the day, multiple hits of sugar caffeine-based products occur to try to keep up with this. And at the end of the day, there's another problem which has effectively a spiral effect on all of this, and you can test this with heart rate variability, but you'll see that your sympathetic system is in overdrive and causing difficulty sleeping, or the quality of sleep is reduced. So what are we going to do about it? Well, again, 60 minutes before the day begins for you at work, have your first one of your SFuels primed. You'll start the day, try to stick with some type of low-carb breakfast, whatever that is. We offer a SFuels cereal called Keto 3, which is just that. But around an hour to 2 hours into the day, you can take a second dose of SFuels primed. That amount is sufficient for cognitive functions in the workday, two doses. And generally speaking, we would guide against multiple doses, if you will, in the second half, in the PM, the afternoon of the day, because of its effect then on increasing the sympathetic output. Now, everyone has different situations. You could have a single day that is just a massive day. You're presenting through the day, and you still have to, after you present, get off and crunch a number of briefs or updates or presentations, etc. And the rest of the week, you'll have time to catch up and recover. But for that day, maybe you do need to have a strong afternoon in addition to a strong morning. So you can make the call, but in terms of just a well-executed, upgraded mental edge and ensure that you have the poise through the day, our guidance is 60 minutes before you begin your day, and then somewhere between 60 minutes and 2 hours into your day, have that second dose, and that will keep you primed mentally and cognitive function for the day. Now, the third lifestyle is that of the gamer, and this is a really fascinating area. We're putting a bunch of study into that, and it's an ongoing area of research, but very common to see the use of high caffeine and high sugar drinks and confectionery, candy, etc. had through the gaming experience. And I think gamers surprised at just how negative effects sugar is having when they actually begin to remove it, and how they can have far more control and dexterity when they have a far more balanced blood sugar level. They have a far more balanced cognitive function. And this is really important because if you look at typically this gameplay of 5 to 6 hours and you play out the crash and the spiking of sugar and the crashing and the reduction, if you will, of cognitive functions, the end game, which is most important for gamers, it's when the number of gamers has reduced, the environment is tighter, and this is now down to the last part. It's a little bit like the last 100 meters of the 400-meter track, and there's only a few of you left to compete to work out who wins. Well, if you look at the cycles of blood sugar, it's very, very common that you would see that by the time they would get into that period, if it's 3 to 4 to 5 hours, very common that your blood sugars are going to be lowered, your ability to react and have those fast reaction times are going to be impacted. So what do we do about that? Similar story. 60 minutes before gameplay begins, have your first SFuels primed. That's going to get the cognitive function ready. Through the game, you should be having clearly some hydration. You should be having some electrolytes. You don't need the sugar. You're going to be at an aerobic state, meaning that you can easily process fat for fuel, and you really want to be producing ketones where possible. Our guidance would be is use an MCT-based drink like SFuels Train, combine that with your SFuels Prime to elevate and upgrade the fat oxidation to facilitate a more balanced nutrition. And if you do want to snack on something that's low carb, high in fat. Take a look at our SFuels Life Bars. I think you'll find them magic for the gameplay. They're easy to get to. You can throw them down, and you're not going to be spiking these blood sugars through the game. So, folks, I hope you find that super interesting. We're jazzed about our latest product, SFuels Primed. Go prime your mojo. It's now up on the website. You can pre-order from October 18, 2021. I hope you find some fun with that and prove it in your lifestyle, whether that's in the workplace, in work, or on the sporting field, or on the track, or also in the gym, out in the endurance sports of the world, and certainly in the fascinating world of esports and gaming. I hope this will help you perform well and win in the end game. Have a great time. Thanks for joining us at Monday Mindshare and at SFuels. We'll catch up with you real soon.